please, for the sake of me not looking like an idiot, pronounce your last name for us.
Okay. Well, it's Kristen and then Moller, like the tooth.
Moller. So I did get
Kristen.
it. I was quite there, wasn't I?
You were almost there. We were almost there.
Yeah.
Thank,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's
Thank you,
it's my
Marcus.
Midwest swing. Yeah, it's definitely
Yeah,
my
that's right.
Midwest twang.
Marcus, thank you for having me.
But yeah, it's a pleasure to have you, and but as we were saying on the other side, this is a very timely topic with all that's been going on in California. You've been there, you walked it, and you can talk it. So there's more to surviving the wildfire than like buying marshmallow stocks and all that. It's a delicate dance of grief and grounding. And I want you to just take us through some trans- transformative tools today, and guide our souls into this how to get out of this drag. So I guess my first question would be, just maybe take us into your story and you maybe give us some introspective.
Yeah. So the book that we're talking about is called Phoenix Rising: Stories of Remarkable Women Walking Through Fire, because as you talk about on the show, community is so important when you're faced with something like any kind of trauma, as we know. And I was thinking about the people in California right now. There's so many of them that community could feel just completely overwhelming because you could be a number among thousands and thousands of people. In my fire, we were a small mountain community, and there were, as far as fires go, it was small. It's I think 7,000 acres and 21 homes, but 3 people died. So for the size of the fire and for, it only being 21 homes, for 3 people to die is pretty substantial. But we came together in community, and, that was one of the things that was just to not have to be alone in it, because it is, I think when you're going through the loss of a home, it's kind of, there are a whole bunch of layers to it, because when you lose a person or a pet, there are resources, there are books about those types of things, but people don't really know what to do when you lose a thing, and some people kind of treat it like losing a thing. Whereas for most people, it's a major loss. It's a before and after, it's a line in the sand that changes everything. And that's how it was for us, before the fire and after the fire. I mean, it's like, for the world, before COVID and after COVID, we have these things that are before and after. Yeah. So,
And the thing about it is, people sometimes they don't realize that, that there's trauma involved with this. And your journey through trauma, there was some practical strategies that maybe surprised even you on how you were effective, that helped you maintain emotional stability. Maybe what were some of those practical strategies?
Well, it's interesting to say, I listened to your interview with, is it Tia, that was talking about the Tutu, the Veterans Organization. I think it was, yes. Yeah. And that was such an amazing interview. Both of you were so inspiring, and I really appreciate that. And I actually went and made a donation to that Veterans Organization after hearing your interview. And she was just amazing. And, when you talk about trauma and you talk about PTSD, I think a lot of people think military, first responders. They don't think, the general population. They don't even think losing a home, but it is, it is a traumatic event. Even if, I happened to be there as the fire was coming up the hill. And so it kind of made it wasn't burning down exactly behind me, but it probably burned within the next 30 minutes, if that. I mean, probably more like 20 minutes after I left. And it was, so it definitely, it caused trauma, it really did. And so I think, how it is, like when you're in it, you're not thinking, oh, I have all these tools, you just kind of do what's in front of you, and so, I mean, I had the background as a therapist and having been through other things in my life. But what I initially did was I wrote. I just started blogging and I just wrote a lot. Your door's opening.
Yes, it's
Someone's coming in. So that was really just having that practice every morning, getting up, making my coffee, sitting down on the couch and writing and just saying whatever I needed to say and not worrying about how it sounded, just, and then putting it out on a blog where then I had people responding. I had other fire survivors from earlier fires. I had, friends responding and just that being heard and having people thank me for sharing and thank me for helping them understand what it was like to go through that. That was my biggest tool, allowing myself to be in grief, just allowing myself to be where I was really, really important because, I think that's something we do too, is we think, as a society, we think we should be further along. And as, individuals, we can buy into that and think, shouldn't I be over it by now? And I really kind of naturally became a year, not that a grief process should stick to just a year, but it was for me a solid year of doing that writing practice. So that was one of the, I think I think you, maybe in your email to me, you talked about comedy. I actually did a stand-up comedy routine during this period of time. I had a dear friend, her name is Christina Hall, and she teaches people to do stand-up. She's a very brilliant comedian. And I needed that, it was like that edgy humor, the edginess and needing to not make light of it as in diminishing it, but just play with the edges of it and, kind of the crazy things that people say to you,
Yeah.
like when we were sifting through the ashes on one of the first times I think most people do tend to sift through their ashes just to see what you can find. And it's amazing. I mean, it's all artifacts. It's nothing really, usually nothing keeps its form, but we had heard a story. My husband had gone for a business trip and we'd heard a story about someone finding a wedding ring that they had left behind. And he had,
No.
by accident, left his in the bathroom. And so we were looking for that and we never found it, but it had us just sift through the ashes. And we had a bunch of friends helping and we had it all kind of set up and, dust masks and screens so we could drop the ashes through. And a friend showed up, someone who I didn't know that well. I was standing there talking to him and another person. And here's this, destruction behind us. And he said, it must be so freeing not to have any stuff. And I just thought, I mean, really? You looked
Yeah,
at this burned out.
good time to say that, right?
Not the time, not the
Wow.
time. No.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Christian, what you have just shared with us is truly remarkable. And like the biggest thing that stood out from what you just, opened it to us and was vulnerable with us about is the fact that like people expect you to like just get over it. And a lot of times it's trauma that's kind of like stuff in the closet, just like we saw my closet opening by my cat, and, but in all serious thing, we sometimes we need an emotional compass to guide us through our trauma and how others might recognize their own, what would people want to like use for their emotional compass to recognize that they have.
That they have trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah, gosh, that's such a good question. And referring back to Tia, your interview with her again, she said something really great
Mhm.
about the layers of trauma. And I forget how she said it exactly, but how it can get more confusing over time if their
Yeah.
particular traumas are not dealt with. And, I think for me personally, it was another layer. And I knew to deal with the fire, but there was still underlying trauma that I hadn't yet dealt with, even though I've been doing work for many, many years. There was just some underlying things that I hadn't yet dealt with that kind of came to the surface later. So I think, it can become this cesspool of traumas, and you sometimes don't even know what is what and what you're reacting to. And, I think with the fire, it was because I was super clear of how much our home meant to me, to us, my husband and myself. It was a place it was a sanctuary. It was magical little cabin on the side of a mountain. And it was just it was our dream home. So I was really clear of how much it meant to me and what that loss was. And I think did a really good job of honoring that. But, we're not always gifted with the ability to to see clearly what's what, And
Right.
I think later on, I had a kind of a mental health crisis a few years ago that was the accumulation of many years of things, that some things that were out of some early childhood trauma that was out of I actually did not even realize it. And because I was a therapist and I worked in that field for a bit, I was sure that I didn't have that particular type of early childhood trauma. But then it started showing up in ways kind of probably when I was ready for it, I guess. It's very odd
Yeah,
how it can do that.
it is.
But I think, so they're just, it can be a lonely ride with trauma. And again, I think, you and Tia were talking about, sorry to keep referencing that show, but I just thought it was so great.
That's
You were referencing, wanting civilians to understand that there's not as much help as we might think there is for veterans. And I think for civilians there's still like, it's so much talked about so much more these days, trauma. But I think there is still this, well, I didn't experience combat. I'm not a police officer who experienced this, so I don't have a right to say PTSD and then there's the other extreme where the word trauma can just be overused for everyday I stubbed my toe and chipped my brand new pedicure. I'm traumatized, like it can be overused like that, So it's an interesting arena, and I think we're getting better as a society to recognize it, but we're also kind of in this weird, where it's, a buzzword, but too much of a buzzword. But I know that, when I went through my experience a few years ago, I was not wanting to talk about it. I was not wanting to just put it out there. It was a very select group of people that knew what I was experiencing, because it was, the fire it was easier. And for me, it was easy for me to put myself out there with that, because it was so blatant, and I had pictures to prove it, and I had the impact. But 3 years ago, it was not that. It was, it was something that felt more dark and murky, and I wanted to keep hidden, and there was a lot of shame around it. So it's been interesting to experience these various types of trauma and the ways I respond and the ways I'm afraid people will respond. And even being someone with all my tools to find myself in that place was quite something.
Oh. Yeah, isn't it like you speaking my language right now?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, after talking with so many, different therapists and so many people who are versed in this or got the life experience in addition to having the education, background such as yourself, it's remarkable because like people don't realize it's just like the colors of the rainbow, right? It's a rainbow, but there's different colors inside of the rainbow and that makes up this rainbow. And such is true with trauma. There's different layers, there's different, colors and all ways that it may appear or may not appear, and before you know it, it's like, okay, I've been ignoring this thing for this long, and now am I placing myself in a certain category of people or not? And I, I think with the way society has painted, mental health and trauma, and like you said, sectionizing it, and it's now like clout chasing when you mention it. Oh yeah,